Strategies for growing ornamentals. What you're looking for, in my view, is what we call seasonal succession. In other words, you're trying to plant a garden that has something flowering almost every month. And hopefully provides food for pollinators. And the thing about perennials is once you invest in them, if you keep them well, they will last forever. You have to learn how to divide them and to reproduce them when they get perhaps a little bit older. But you will continue to have the same plant for a very, very long time. I'm going to talk a little bit about zone gardening. Have any of you ever heard that term? Anybody? Yes. So I say nasty gardener must have. But zone gardening is about how to set your garden up to be have the most thrifty use of water as well as labor. And I'll talk about that later. And I think you should also take a look at what plants are adapted. We have native plants and we have adapted plants. It's an argument about, you can argue forever about what's really native, because many of the plants that we have were traded up from Mexico, 400 years ago, or brought in by settlers, and they've been here a long time. Everybody thinks they're native, but they're not. I mean, in the sense that they were some kind of original thing that you can go back to. But there are also adapted plants. A lot of the things that we grow, in fact, come out of the dry prairies in the Midwest and have become part of our natural environment. The watering system, in terms of setting it up for a garden like this, you should also aim for watering at the base of the stem. It should not be sprayed, except for certain plants that require that. But most plants need to be watered toward the bottom, and it really inhibits the forming of a lot of disease if you do that. Another trick about strategies is that if you use a lot of aromatic herbs in the garden, you should mix them with the flowers for a number of reasons. Not only do they attract pollinators, if you want to grow a few hybrids that aren't going to attract pollinators, if they don't have any perfume or whatever, you can put a couple of herbs in there and it will do the job. And the other reason is that if you have a problem like I have with rabbits, a lot of these aromatic plants will deter animals from eating. Daffodils do it too. I don't know if you're aware of that certain bulbs are poisonous to animals, daffodils, hyacinths, and you can plant them around the things that are much more attractive to the animals, and they'll avoid them because they can't even smell them, And one exception is gophers. Somebody told me that they planted the daffodils in the hope of deterring gophers, and what the gophers did, they dug a hole and rolled the bulb down the tunnel and got at what they wanted. So gophers are a problem. But be patient. I've been living in the same house for over 40 years, and it's taken a long time to figure out what works best for where I am. Just be patient. And the other thing about strategies is that it's a wise choice not to cut the foliage back in the fall. In other words, what you do, because we have a temperature situation where things go up and down like they are doing this month, there is a danger that the plant will start growing and it will get hit with a very strong fruit freeze. If you leave those stems on, what it does is it protects the crown of the plant. So you wait till maybe like early April or late March to start cutting things back. In the fall, if you really can't stand the disorder of it, you can trim it a little bit at the top so it looks neater, but leave it on. And in fact, the more naturalistic gardens that they have now, they leave all the stems on and they try to pick plants that have good seed heads, so that it's really attractive to look at in the wintertime. How do you select a plant? Hardiness. You always, when you go to the nursery, you're going to buy a new plant, you see a tag on it. Very frequently, it will give you a zone. Sometimes they hide it and don't tell you. But you need to think about how hardy they are, because we have a cold area. We have a cold period that goes below 32. And hardiness, the USDA has developed maps. We are in Albuquerque, which has a number of growing zones, probably 5 or 6 in various parts of the city. Is a 6 or a 7, mostly 7, for hardiness. The sunset, any of you that use the sunset gardening books anymore? Anybody do any books anymore? They use a very different labeling systems. It doesn't cross over, so you have to be careful about using those books, what they mean. And they also, the information they have about New Mexico is not very good. They tend to be more tuned into California and the Pacific Northwest and Arizona. So you now look at that number. We also have something called a heat map, which has been developed by the American Horticultural Society. It isn't often used on plants, but it is a consideration. It measures how many days over 86 degrees exist in a particular area of the country, and it categorizes plants about their ability to tolerate that number of days over 86 degrees. 86 degrees is chosen because it is the temperature at which plants really cannot tolerate ultraviolet heat, and they start to go dormant or collapse. Water needs. Do you have a drip system? What kind of water do you have? The soaker hoses. How much water does your drip system provide? It's amazing how many people don't know that you may have a drip system that produces an inch of water an hour, and they run the thing for 10 minutes. Can you imagine how much water that is? So you have to think about how much are you really producing. One trick is to run the system and then let it sit overnight, and then put your finger in and see how far down the water has gone. There are also drip systems which are not simply like a soaker hose or a drip or have an emitter. There are drip systems with little fountains so that you can mix perennials and shrubs and provide different levels of watering on the same system. I think the one that I get has a little fountain with a top, and it comes out in a little spray, sort of a drippy circular pattern, and it will screw the top screws down from anywhere from 3 gallons an hour to 1 gallon an hour, half a gallon an hour, and I can change it depending on what item I'm trying to water. It's a much easier way to water your plants accurately in a mixed bed. Does the plant need soil that needs to have organic matter in it? Our soil is very lean, with the exception of down by the valley, where there's a lot of clay. And if you have sandy soil or decomposed granite, it means there's very little organic matter. You've got to have organic matter to grow anything, including vegetables and trees, for that matter. What you have to do is figure out whether you need to put it in. The best thing to add to it is compost, not manure. Manure is often has mineral salts in it that in our soil are very dangerous. Nowadays they use herbicides on a lot of the things that they feed cattle, and you may have, or horses or goats, and you may have some of that herbicide in what you're getting if you buy raw manure from somebody or a local source. You have to find out whether those things have been screened out. And manure is also very bad for the water table. So compost is your best bet. Many of the native plants plants that we have don't want that. They really want a lean soil, and you do not give them much compost at all, if any. Very important. You have the time and energy to care for what you're going to plant. I think you should think about that. And the other way to look at it is, does it come from a climate that's similar to ours, or one that you think is adaptable? Is it a mountain plant that comes from mountains? Is it a plant that originated in the dry prairies? Is it something that comes from the steppes of Europe, which is the grasslands that look very much like ours? Does it like our temperature swings? I'm going to just go over this fast. I'm sure this is master gardener stuff. It's always wise to try to learn botanical names because they're more accurate than the common name. Although common names often have nice character to them. One of my favorites is a little plant we grow out here, an annual that self-seeds called Nigella. Common name is Love in a Mist. And I've got a list of how you look at those. Oh, plant hardiness to heat and cold. I mentioned this. And what I want to say about heat and cold is that there's a number and then there's the real thing. The number helps, but what survives the winter is also a product of how well your soil drains, whether it's wet or dry, whether it's up against a wall that radiates heat during the day. And so there's many ways in which you can go beyond the number, and there's many ways you can defeat the number. So you need to kind of think about hardiness as a more complicated concept. People will tell you, for example, that you can grow figs if you put them against a south-facing wall. And it's because that wall absorbs sun and heat and then emits it at night. And so it tolerates frost in that position much better than if it was out in the center of the garden and being battered by wind and so on. And you can grow figs here, as you know from the fig man having at the market in the summertime. And I mentioned that. The heat, and again, the heat map, it'll give you a number and it'll tell you how many days we have over 86 degrees and whether this plant may help be able to survive that, but it doesn't take into account the way our temperature operates. We have a 20-degree, 30-degree difference between night and day. Our heat doesn't peak until 3 o'clock in the afternoon most of the time, and it's only there for a couple of hours. The minute the sun begins to set, the temperature drops. So even though it may have difficulty according to the number, if you take into account some of these factors, you can always try and see. They also can be sheltered by, and some of that resistance to the heat can be developed by the plant growing in a community. The plants protect one another. They also emit moisture, which keeps them alive. How many times have you seen a plant wilt at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then revive, it's fine, the next morning without you having to give it anything? And that's because it has been, the transpiration, respiration of water, it hasn't been able to keep up, so it protects itself by wilting. That doesn't mean it's going to die. It's a natural reaction to our climate. And these are the two maps. You can look these up online, the USDA and the AHS map. The origins of plants, I've mentioned this. Plants that originate in the mountains, they like gravelly soil. They are accustomed to high ultraviolet like we have. They are used to wind, but they also grow in slightly cooler situations, and the soil has a little more organic matter because they have more rain. So that's all things that you might want to take into account. Plants that originated around the Mediterranean, which a lot of bulbs come from, and a lot of things that we grow, the hardy ones from the Mediterranean, They have long, dry summers and very wet, windy winters. Many plants, as I mentioned earlier, many plants that we grow come from the dry prairies in the Midwest. And this is what I'm talking about. I'm not going through this list, but this is a resource. I listed here what plants came from the mountains, what plants that we have that have come from the dry prairies, the high mountains of Africa, Turkey, cold, hardy Mediterranean herbs, pushing ones that you can use to push the cold zones and so on. This is something you should look up when you want to consult something about whether you might want to pick something. But look at how many of these have come from the high desert mountains that we have. All our penstemons, you know, we have 150 varieties of penstemon in Mexico. 150. Zone gardening. This is a concept that was developed when people became sensitive to the water problem, and we learned that the aquifer that we're sitting on is really not as big as we thought it was, and it's not replenishing itself. And what it is it's sort of an approach where you take a look at your landscape and you say, all right, this patch of ground is, I want to put something on it, but it's really far from the house, it's far from my hose or my watering system, and I'm going to put my driest garden plants out there. As I get closer in to where I'm going to spend time around the house, the patio, the backyard, that's my oasis zone where I'm allowed to use more water. So what you're doing is putting these zones in, the rough zones, the far, the intermediate, and the oasis zones, and you're using it according to the amount of water you're going to use. So you try to set it up. And this is a picture I did on a street nearby where I live of at the outside of a wall right along what we call a health strip, right along the sidewalk, and how they put a zero garden in there that uses very low water. And you see those tall grasses that are part of it. I think that was put in by High Country Garden when it was still operating in Santa Fe. And the idea is that you are trying to be as thrifty in terms of water, and you try to cluster plants together that have the same needs. All right, here's another list. This came out of a book that I'm recommending called Gaia's Garden, G-A-I-A, the Goddess of Plants. And it's a book by permaculturists locally, and there's a discussion of a garden up in Los Alamos in that book, where you take an approach to a garden as a community, and you try to find out how you can put plants together that function with the environment in a really useful, helpful way. And you develop lists like this. This is annuals, perennials, and herbs that attract, and what beneficial insects they attract. Those of you that have studied plant diseases and know, for example, how aphids can be gotten rid of if you have a lot of ladybugs, it'll tell you which of these plants attract ladybugs or provide the habitat for a ladybug to grow, and all these other beneficial insects that you may have heard about, hoverflies, lacewings, and so on, parasitic wasps. All right, how do you plant? You go to the nursery, maybe, or you get something from someone in a pot. You come here and buy a plant sale, and you want to think about planting it. First of all, when you get the pot, you need to turn it over and look and see where the roots are. If they're coming out of the bottom, the chances are that plant has been in that pot for a long time, and it's going to have trouble adapting. So either don't buy it and look for one that doesn't have roots, or you decide you're going to give it some help. You take it out of the pot and you cut the roots back so that it has a chance to grow new ones fast. I also make sure I shake off all the soil. I do not put it into the ground, what will happen if you do that right from the pot into the ground, you're having a pot in the ground, essentially what happens, the plant will not adapt to the soil around it, and it will sit there in its original potting soil and have a hard time. So you want to shake it off, try not to damage it, and then plant it in the prepared hole that you have. The second thing that you do when you buy a plant from a greenhouse or a sale is you don't know how it's been grown. Most of the ones in the big box stores and many of the greenhouses, and many of the nurseries have grown them in greenhouses. And that means the plant is not adapted to the weather in your yard. So what you do is you do what's called hardening off. Okay? You take the pot and you put it on your patio in a sheltered location for at least a week. You water it, let it adapt to the climate that it's going to find itself in before you plant it. I sometimes do it for 2 weeks if I think the plant has really been too sheltered. Otherwise, it's going to go into shock. Okay. Good soil drainage is really important, and what that means is if you put water in the hole that you're going to dig, it should drain out pretty quickly, and it's the most important thing for most plants. If you are living in the valley and you have clay, you all know the problems with drainage, but clay holds on to water. So what you do is you have to either use raised beds or you have to improve your soil down in the valley in order that will drain very well. In that respect, or having sand or decomposed granite in many respects is a really good environment for growing things like this because it's got really good drainage, and especially for mountain plants, which often like that kind of thing. But you do need to add organic matter to it. And then you want to plant it in a hole which is wide, but the same level that the plant was in the pot. You don't want to plant too deeply. If you plant the plant too deeply, it inhibits its bloom. Okay. Water the hole, mend the soil, water the hole, put the plant in, water it again, and see if it sinks. If it sinks, go back and raise it up and put some soil underneath. Then there are many plants which, if you cut them back, after the first set of blooms, they will bloom again. And there's this there's a huge variety of how to do that. I have a book that I always refer to called The Well-Attended Perennial Garden. And one of the most valuable things in that book is she tells you which ones you can cut back. There's also a trick to some of them. If you grow asters, for example, in your garden, and they're tall, and they flop if you leave them, you can cut them back after about the first few months, when they're about a foot or two high. You can cut them back by half, and then they will get bushier. And when they finally bloom in the fall, they will bloom in a way that will not flop. Fascinating book to read about how you can do things like that. Some people take the asters and they do that pruning to the outside plants, and they leave the ones in the middle, and you have asters blooming in two sets, one going up and one holding them down so they don't flop. I mentioned how to plant a bulb, and then that most of the bulbs that we grow that are spring blooming are planted in the fall. There are some which can be planted in the spring, and I mentioned that I constantly mention not taking the leaves off until they turn brown. Drought, you can see this term drought tolerant used. It means a lot of different things to a lot of people, depending on who has put that on the label. Drought tolerant can mean, if we have a period of drought where there's no rain, this plant will survive and recover. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got drought all year long. So you have to be careful how that term is used. But there's been a lot of work done on what really is drought tolerance in the wild. And they all concluded, every single one of them, that it's a deep root system that makes the difference. And let's think about that. It means that when you plant a drought-tolerant plant, you want to encourage its roots to go way down. That isn't going to happen if you have an emitter that only emits 5 inches of water. So you're better off watering less frequently and deeper. And in the end, it's going to be the same amount of water. It's just going to be given to the plant differently, because what you're doing is encouraging the root system to go down.